to the president there. Well, our first is a very inspirational conversation where you'll hear from exceptional women leaders who've been driven and motivated by purpose to endure in crisis against tremendous odds. We're very happy to welcome Alyse Nelson, who's the president and CEO of Vital Voices Global Partnership. Vital Voices Global Partnership invests in women leaders who are solving the world's greatest challenges, from gender-based violence to the climate crisis or economic inequities. Alyse is the author of the best-selling book Vital Voices, The Power of Women, Leading Change Around the World. Please join me in welcoming Alyse Nelson and her speakers.
Well, hello everyone. It's so wonderful to be back, together with all of my fellow activists and allies in this work, and to be back at the incredible Women's Forum once again. So we're going to have a conversation today that I think really builds upon what Madam President of Singapore just said. We all know that our world is in crisis. We certainly know this coming off of COP26, and for those of you who are with us on Thursday night to hear from Vanessa, the extraordinary environmental activist just coming from COP. She's from Uganda, and she witnesses it firsthand. We all know about the refugee crisis, and certainly Rouba, another honoree from the other night, who I'll introduce in just a moment, knows very well how the number of displaced people around the world is at astronomical levels and will get worse with the climate crisis. We also know that a global pandemic, as the president said, hit women the hardest, whether it be the massive increase, 30% increase around the world of domestic abuse, or it be the economic issues, childcare, and caring for the sick. So what we know is that women certainly are disproportionately affected by crisis. But here's the thing that I have seen in my 25 years of working with extraordinary leaders on the front lines of change, that in crisis, something comes out in women. A desire to lead, a desire to serve, motivation to bring peace and prosperity to people's lives. And the women that you're going to hear from today have done exactly this. So let me introduce them, and we're going to have one more join us as soon as she arrives. So first, let me introduce Horia Mosadiq. She is from Afghanistan. She founded an organization, SRMO, to really support human rights defenders. She realized there was no one in Afghanistan who was providing that support for those leaders who were stepping out and using their voices, and they were being threatened, they were being assassinated. We also have with us Ruba Mshaweh. She is the founder and director of Sawa for Development and Aid and the Sawa Foundation. She's from Syria and Lebanon, and she'll obviously speak to us about the crisis there. But I want to start off with Ruba because, Ruba, you somehow managed to find the heart in crisis. And I would love for you to start off by talking about how you began this work. I'm a big believer that women are called to leadership because they see a wrong in their community and they want to step up to right it. Can you talk about your sort of driving force or that moment that you stepped up to lead, because you were in your early 20s?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruba. I'm Syrian Lebanese, and as Alyse was saying, I was only 22 when people went in the streets in Syria to demand justice, dignity, freedom for themselves, for their families. And I was studying between London and the Middle East, and I came back to visit my family, and we saw a reportage, a small thing on TV saying, these 40 Syrian families just moved to Lebanon, and at the time, even the word Syrian refugees was not a word. They were just Syrian families who moved to Lebanon because of the violence. And I remember that hit me very hard because, in the Middle East, in Syria and Lebanon, we're known for like generosity, big feasts, food, family, and then seeing them in the streets like that. I just took the car and I drove for 2.5 hours to the north of Lebanon. I saw what these families needed, and I wrote a simple text message. And this text message went viral. In the span of a week, we had like $10,000 at 10 years ago. That's a lot of money, In 15 days, we had $20,000. And this is how Sawa started. Really, I had no hope, or I didn't even imagine that 10 years or 11 years on, we will have half of Syria displaced. Like, we will have almost 12 million refugees. It was 40 families, This is how it started. And it was then where I saw the goodness of people. People wanted to contribute, wanted to do something. And as time passed by, we started to realize that there are so many talents in these communities. These people are inherently entrepreneurs. They are people who want a better life for themselves, their communities. They're humans like us, They want a safe roof for their families, education for their children. And this is how we started our work, by going into the community and just looking at what talents are there in this community and how we can employ these talents to serve their own communities. And this is the work that we do today.
Thank you. So, Haria, you lived in Afghanistan, and because of your work as a human rights defender, and because of your work to support other human rights defenders, you had to flee. And this was not in the most recent mass evacuations that happened in the last couple months, but take us back to 2008 when you decided it was time to leave.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and thank you to Vital Voices and organizers. As an Afghan, since I remember, I always say I would consider myself as a human rights defender, because I grew up in a country that started with war, and for almost all my life I have seen nothing but except violence, killings, injustice. And that was the time that my activism started back in 1980s when I was a student. And that took me till now. And I can't believe that this fight seemed to be never ending. I lost many family members in the past 40 years, including my own brother. I lost the count of how many times I have been displaced, and I have been refugee to several countries. So, and in 2001, when US invaded Afghanistan, and it was an opportunity for all people to come back and to restart our lives, for me, the mission of my life was very different, because for me, it wasn't that I should build my home and start my family again. For me, my mission was to bring the perpetrators to justice and to speak out against the people who used mass atrocities in the past 40 years to kill people and to stand above the law. And unfortunately, that costed me both my personal life and also my profession, because the first death threats and serious death threats started against me by warlords back in 2005. And then by the 2008, my children were attacked, my husband were attacked, and he was shot at, my home was attacked. And it was even now I lost the count of how many times I have been receiving death threats or warning from the government that there is a serious attempt against my life. And then in 2008, I had to take a drastic action and accept a job with Amnesty International and move to London with my family, because I believed that this is my mission, but why should my family pay the price for what I believe, for what I do? And once I took the job and brought my family back. I did not want to claim asylum while I had every opportunity during all my career, because being an asylum seeker, it would stop me from going back to Afghanistan, and it would also show to the perpetrators that I have been afraid and I'm not, and they can use that threat and intimidation to scare others. So, and even last year when the first hit list of the Taliban that was published in Afghanistan in March 2020, unfortunately my name was on the top among 8 other human rights defenders. But that never stopped me from going back and standing against the Taliban, warlords, and other human rights perpetrators who were killing and using atrocity and violence against my people. And I would continue to do that.
Well, just to put a pin in what you just said, she tops the kill list of the Taliban, but continues to go back and forth to Afghanistan. It's really a true heroine. So, Ruba, coming back to you, 10 years on, almost 11 years since the crisis. You, I know, cannot go into Syria. It is not safe for you to go into Syria. But you work and support refugee camps and refugees in Syria, in Lebanon. Talk a bit about your work, the impact of your work, but also as a woman leader, how you approach it differently.
I'm very honored to be sitting next to you, Haria. Really, very, very humbled. Yeah, sorry. No, I mean, we were just talking this morning, but you know, when the recent things happened in Afghanistan, we all cried so much. Then people had to remind us, "You're not Afghani. Why are you?" But it's like the fate of the region is the same. Unfortunately, generations after generations are facing war and destruction. And even today, I look at the refugee camps 10 years on. I mean, I spoke 2 days ago about Ahmed. You know, some of the people who moved into the refugee camp, they were 5 or 4 or 6, and they're today 16 or 17 or 18. And the average is 70 years that you spent in a refugee camp usually. So that's a long, yeah, that's a long time. And that's a whole generation basically of just lost lives. And people think today that you know, after 10 years of Syria, that the war has ended. I think this is Weiwei.
The panel.
Yeah. So after people think that after you know 10 years of violence in Syria, that it's now safe, that people are pushing refugees to go back home. But it isn't. You know, people until today, people who come back to Syria are persecuted, executed, taken to prison. There is 80% destruction in Syria, no infrastructure, no schools, and still people have the will to live. And you go into the communities, and I'm daily inspired by the women in the communities, because they have, you know, lost family members. I lost a lot of family members as well in Syria. They have lost their lives, they have lost everything, and still they wake up every day and they fight, they negotiate, they do the daily negotiations. And when you think of leadership, of political leaders, of mediators, you often think of, you know, amazing women up there. You know, Angela Merkel. You think of, you know, Margaret Thatcher. You think of all of these big names that we know. But for me, I really think of the everyday leaders on the ground, because these are the real politicians. They are negotiating politics every day, trying to negotiate with ISIS, with armed groups on the ground, trying to negotiate with a regime that has been killing them for 40 years, trying to negotiate with their own husbands, with their own patriarchal powers within the community, within the camps. And yeah, they inspire me to think and lead differently. And what I believe we need most today is to rethink what leadership really is, you know? Because we have seen even in COVID times, the feminine model of leadership was a great success. We have seen Jacinda Ardern doing wonderfully, for example, for New Zealand. We have seen that the model of leadership that is more feminine, more empathetic, more inclusive, that builds on solidarity, that builds on strong community rather than the right-wing isolation, individualistic model, that goes far along. So I'm very happy to see such a big crowd, and I always tell people in Europe, people in the US, I mean, you have democracy. We have been 10 years fighting for democracy. So please use this democracy and vote for the right people. You don't have to be a woman to have feminine leadership style, but vote for people who have this feminine leadership style, who are welcoming, who are inclusive, who want to keep your social services, who want to keep the community and the society together. Because I believe if you vote right here, everything will be okay somewhere else, because all of our causes are so much interconnected.
So interconnected, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. One of the reasons I think that the work of Vital Voices is so valuable is because of the network of women. And both of these women, as well as Weiwei, who's going to join us via video in just a minute, is so valuable. And I think it's so valuable because so often as leaders, we look at, the model of leadership in our country, and it's so different, right? And it's so top-down, hierarchical, no empathy, no compassion, one decision maker.
Oh, no.
And what I think is so powerful about you and Weiwei and Haria is that you are bringing forth that new model, even though you didn't know that's what leadership was, right? Because you see a very different model. And I think the more and more that we see and mirror back to each other, the more we begin to see people take on this model and recognize this is actually what we need. And what I've learned is that women lead differently, and that difference is precisely what our world needs right now. I didn't say better than men, I just said different. But really, I think it's so critically needed. The empathy, not weakness, strength. It takes tremendous strength to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. That is empathy. So Weiwei, I want to bring you into this conversation, and it's wonderful to have you with us. I think, oh, there you are. Wow, you're big. It's wonderful to have you with us, Weiwei. You are coming to us originally from Myanmar, and just to give you a little bit of background on Weiwei's story, when she was 18 years old and starting to go to law school, she and her entire family were arrested and put in prison. She was in the insane prison, which is a notorious prison for mental and physical abuse and torture. Why was she put in prison? What was her crime? Her father was a political leader, an activist fighting for democracy and human rights, and a school teacher. For the next 7 years, she was in prison. So Weiwei, tell us a bit about what it was like, but also how it is that you kept your spirit of compassion and of understanding alive in prison, and then what you did with that. Because I think so many people, you get out of prison and you would think, I want revenge. But you did something different. You got your revenge in a very different way, and I think it speaks to the power of your leadership.
Thank you very much, Alyse, for including me in this important panel. I apologize for not being able to be in person there. So yes, I come from Myanmar, and I was born and grew up under the military dictatorship. As a daughter of politicians, I was aware of the military dictatorship and the repressions under the systems. However, as a kid, as I grew up and as a teenager, even until I finished my high school, I went to school until I was arrested. I wasn't thinking about becoming a politician or an activist, because under the military dictatorship, repression is the political activists and politicians are particularly under repressed, and there is no space for them. Seeing my father's experience itself, I never had a thought to become an activist, but it was when I was arrested I was sentenced to 17 years actually at the age of 18, and had to spend 7 years in the prison before I was released with the amnesty, with the presidential amnesty. So within this period, my life and my thoughts and everything has changed. I met with hundreds of young women, young to old, and from all different backgrounds, poor to rich, and different ethnic communities. Listening to them, understanding how privileged I was, knowing what the political system looked like in the country, and having been able to go to some schools and having some dreams for my future. I felt that, having that sense of awareness itself is a privilege. Talking to many other young women, had not been able to go to the school and struggling for life under the corrupt political systems and economic systems. And, they don't understand, even they're victim of the system. For me, knowing that was a privilege, and I promised myself at that time, if I were released from the jail, I will try to fix the systems. With a small mind as a teenager, I had this big thought. And also, I thought no young people should be in prison for no reason like me. And I will make sure that. And then after 7 years in 2012, I was released with the name of transition to democracy. But the democracy, I realized, was not real. And many communities were targeted, especially people in Afghan area enjoyed some freedom and some liberty under the name of the so-called top-down fake democracy transitions. However, people in ethnic communities, that Myanmar is a very, very diverse country, and people in ethnic areas remain suppressed, and some communities were even more targeted, especially my own community, the Rohingya, were targeted, subjected to genocidal campaign. And I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. I had to take a step, and I knew I can contribute to addressing this problem, and I can at least provide voices of the marginalized community by creating the platform. So I decided to form. I mean, as a young woman, the last thing, as a young woman, it wasn't easy to find a spot for you to speak up, to give your voice. Then I had to make these big decisions to create my own organization and have courage to walk from there, so that I was able to provide the voice for the voiceless, for marginalized community, and promote the idea of democracy, democratic value. Although oftentimes we talk about democracy, majority of the people, the society does not understand. And I think that's how the marginalization, discriminations, and prejudice at the end, like genocide-like condition can happen. So I put everything I have, my knowledge, my skill, capacity, resources to promote the idea, the ideology, the values of democratic principles and values, as well as become a voice for protecting marginalized women and women and men communities in Myanmar.
Thank you. So Weiwei is from one of the most perpetrated, discriminated against, harassed ethnic minorities, the Rohingya. And so you think about the backdrop of that, of being heavily marginalized. One, as a woman and targeted, there have been mass rapes, tortures against the Rohingya women. Now we're seeing an even greater increase of violence against women across the country following the February coup in Burma. And you think about it, it's so hard to keep these things front page news, right? These crises continue. It's not just that flash when we see them, in the press, but they do continue. But there are leaders who are among us, who walk among us, who continue on this fight. And I wanna bring it back to Haria because it has been the absolute privilege of my life to partner with Haria and other Afghan and American women. One of my mentors, Milan Verveer, at Georgetown University now. She was the first ever global ambassador for the government, and then now at Georgetown University, Women, Peace, and Security. Zainab Salbi, founder of Women for Women. Mina's List, just an incredible group of women who've come together when we began to see that the Taliban was moving forth, taking over cities, and when Kabul fell, it became very clear that those women, like Haria, who topped the list, the kill list, we had already seen assassinations happening in the months prior, no one was coming to save them. No one was coming to help them evacuate. The priority, certainly of the US government, was put on those who worked for the US government, US citizens. But what about the women leaders who, in crisis, fought for stability and democracy? No one was coming to support them. And so this coalition came together of women, quite frankly, from around the world to say no. And I have to tell you, I think we have to continue to say no. This cannot stand that women are always last on the list when it comes to evacuations, support, leadership. We have to say no. We have to start talking about the importance of women's leadership and women's voices. We have worked together to evacuate 1,200 women and their families, women leaders and their families, and we focused on these leaders because we knew if we did not get the leaders out, there would be no voice to keep the drumbeat up because, as we all know, the media will go away. Talk about what this has meant for you to help with these evacuations, and sadly we know, you continue to work inside the country. But sadly, we know not everyone will be evacuated, and life for women and girls will get horrific, has become horrific.
Yeah, thank you. At the time when Taliban were progressing, and as Alyse said, cities and towns would fall to the Taliban one after the other. So I was contacted by Tanya, Olivia, and also other members of the Vital Voices that let's put a list together. Let's put a list of the women leaders together. And this is how we started. It started in July. And then we quickly put a list of around 500 women leaders from across Afghanistan with their families. And then we worked through that. But then soon the situation changed on 16th of August when Kabul fell to the Taliban, and we were all so shocked and we were all in despair. And then we started working for the evacuation. I think for the whole month of August, between 15th to 27th of August, none of us slept maybe over 2 hours. We were staying awake day and night to make sure that these women leaders are evacuated from their provinces. They were brought to Kabul, and to make sure that they are getting on a plane. But then it wasn't that easy. Taliban were everywhere. There were checkposts. Women were searched. And then the Kabul airport became such a chaos that, many people were saying, getting to America is much easier than getting to the Kabul airport. Suicide bombers were looming everywhere, shootings, killings. So many people were killed. And then there were also times that we all broke into tears because we lost women for 6 hours and we didn't know what happened to her and her family because she just screamed and said that you're shooting on us, and that's it. So, but beside all that, I'm so thankful, I'm so grateful for Vital Voices, for the resources that you have put together, and you allowed us to evacuate those people. Like right now, around 1,200 people were evacuated. and now they are in Albania, if I may say, and even their living condition is, it is not, I would say, like excellent, but it is 100 times much better than many other refugee camps or places where refugees are staying. And at the same time, I think what is really important, many of these women say that now I can sleep with peace. This has been the night that I went to sleep with peace after months of sleeplessness. So this means so much, and I think I'm so grateful also for everyone who is supporting not only people in Afghanistan, but also people around the world who are facing a similar crisis and similar situation. But it is so key because most of the times I feel that if I was killed, I think there wouldn't have been that much of noise. If those women were killed, there wouldn't have been that much of noise about the atrocities that's happening. Unfortunately, we are just at the beginning of the atrocities. On daily basis, we are receiving reports of enforced disappearances, public executions, arbitrarily detentions, and summary executions of so many Afghans in Afghanistan, and unfortunately, none of them are making to the media headlines. And I'm so sad that, you know, even we are being forgotten slowly and slowly.
Yes. I know that we are out of time for this discussion, and as you all know, I mean, we could, with these three women, we could spend all afternoon. But I think the thing that I would just leave you with is something that I have learned from each of these women, and that is to not lose hope, to stay focused on each day and moving forward, and have confidence and trust in the leadership and the vision that you have for a more peaceful world. Thank you to each of you for what you do.